Welcome back, my fellow aggressive learners. In this section, we shall be talking about what last rule and specificity. All right, I'm not going to waste your time in this section. Now, I just want you to understand that we have explained this before, but I just want to put more light on it so we get better understanding. Now look at our CSS code, right? Now remember we have H2, right? Now let me come down here and define another H2. The H2 is already green. Don't forget this is our H2 and this is our H2. So I'm going to redefine this H2 again. I'm going to say H2 color. I want it to be what? Black. So you notice that this last one takes precedence over the first one. So in CSS, the last rule always work most times, though not all the time and not for all elements, but majority of the elements. This last rule will always work. So when you are working and you need to learn to define the element in their order, all right, so you don't override. The same reason why if you have CSS here and then you want to write another CSS, you must be sure that what you want to write, you want it to override whatever you already have inside here. So the order in which this thing is placed also matters, all right, because last rule will always apply. The last rule you wrote will always apply. All right, so that's it for last rule. Let's look at specificity. Now we have class here. Let me add id to it. All right, let me add id item to it. Now look at this id. I'm going to define the same thing I defined inside this item. I'm going to redefine what I have in item. So it's going to be hashtag item, all right, and I'm going to say background color. I'm going to give it what aquarium, right, and I will refresh. So what happens? Who is taking precedence? You can see that the hash is taking the id is taking precedence over the class, which means that the id is more specific than class, and class is more specific than element. Now let's go and check what kind of element is that. The element is what? Is a p tag. Let's write a p element. Remember, we're talking about what? Specificity. Let me copy this and put here. We're talking about specificity. Now watch, let me do a p element background red. P element background red. Last rule applied. All right, last rule applied. So now, but watch. Remember we have two we have two tags here. All right, we have two p tag. One is in article and one is in div. All right, now last rule, remember we talk about last rule. Last rule apply for the second p element, but for the first p element we have an id inside. So the id takes precedence. Id has more specificity than element. All right, id has more specificity than element. So I'll just put this and put it at the top. So this has more specificity than more element. That means this is more specific, and this one is also more specific, but this is less specific. All right, so when you define an element selector are less specific. So this H2, for instance, if you go inside this H2 and define an ID, let's say heading, and then define a class heading. If you give this thing color 4K, now permit me to highlight everything. So refresh. So we'll have a fresh ground. Now look at that heading. So I'm going to do class heading. Heading is what? Color red. Right? Now if I do id dot hashtag id heading, you will notice that what? The heading will take what? Will take precedence. Did you see that? So that is what specificity does. Now go and look that element. That element is H2. If I go and define H2, you will see that it is only this. In fact, let me add this thing to here so that it will not affect this H2. It will just be, everything will work alongside. So anything called H2, we want it to carry heading and this heading. So I want to go and define H2. Let's see if it is going to work. Now let's do color what? Color blue. Did it work? No. Meaning that this is an element selector, this is an ID selector, this is a class selector. So an ID selector is higher in precedence than what? Is more specific than what? Than H1, than class selector. And class selector is more specific what? Than element selector. All right, good. Now let's look at what we call what? Universal selector. So I'm going to go here. I'm going to clean all this, for instance, and I'm going to do what we call universal selector. Now universal selector is always preceded by what? By an asterisk. By an asterisk followed by this. Now I can go ahead and say color, and then I give it red. It takes everything, and that's just with what universal. So I am saying everything in the browser, give it a color. But one funny thing is that in terms of specificity, this universal selector is the lowest. Among them. Lowest among them in that if I define P, remember I have P tag now. Inside that, if I define P and say P color should be what? Green, is going to, things change. Means it is the lowest in terms of specificity. If I also go ahead and define heading, which is the next higher selector, I define color blue, it takes over. If I define ID, it takes over. So this is what universal selector, this is what we refer to as specificity, universal selector, and other. Now, universal selector is basically used to clear the initial browser style. And when we start doing our basic or higher project, we get to understand that. So that's it on CSS last rule, specificity and universal selector. I hope you get the gist, and if you don't, please do well to hit me back on my inbox. I'll be right there to respond to you. Thank you very much, and see you in the next class.